The Christian fundamentalist always accuses us skeptics of being unwilling to believe no matter what evidence is presented before us. Actually, I'm the easiest person in the world you should be able to convince. And stay tuned and I'll tell you why. I remember watching a debate a few years ago with the infamous Bart Ehrman versus Christian apologist Peter Williams. Now, Bart is a friendly enough guy, but he will draw the sword if you don't have your facts straight. And he was cutting Peter Williams to shreds. Williams was getting more and more exacerbated as Airman continued to point out contradictions in the New Testament that could not be reconciled. Williams was getting upset and finally asked him, "What contradictions are you talking about specifically?" In which Airman simply looked at him astounded and said, "I just named them." And then he proceeded to say it just doesn't make sense, in which Williams, in my opinion, completely lost the debate with his next words, "Well, it makes sense to me because I'm a Christian." Exactly what all of us skeptics keep telling you. It only makes sense because you believe it. And you don't want to not believe it because it threatens your afterlife, as is true with anyone who practices any religion. That's why all over the world, no matter what religion we're talking about, there's so few deconverts. But Christians, especially Christian fundamentalists, which is the target of my channel, always say it doesn't matter what we present, you're just not going to believe. Well, no, that's not the case at all, as I was actually once a Christian. I was reluctant to deconvert, and I wish to this day I could believe in the legitimacy of the Christ divinity. And this is why I should be very easy to convince. It takes a very objective person to be willing to change their opinion on any matter. Once we believe something, whether in politics, ideas, worldview, or religion, most people aren't willing to alter their stance. As a matter of fact, even if someone is losing an argument, regardless of what they're talking about, that person will dig in his heels because people, by nature, are that reluctant to change opinions. But me, I should be easy. Because I want to. I want to be proven wrong in this channel and sit comfortably the rest of my life thinking that Christ is my Savior and that heaven exists exactly as described for those who believe in Him, and conduct a relatively moral life. How simple my existence would be then. I certainly could sleep better at night and wouldn't lie awake with all these ideas for videos that I have at 3 in the morning. And I have been in this sort of debate with Christian fundamentalists, much like the one I described with Peter Williams and Bart Ehrman, and that's exactly what happens. You're arguing with people who have no idea what they're talking about, have never researched their own faith. Many have not only not read the origins of their Bible, but the Bible itself, minus the few well-noted chapters that they talk about every Sunday Mass. And then when you push them against the wall with historical fact, science, reason, and rationale, they become just like Peter Williams. They get exacerbated. And finally, they always say the same thing. Well, you just have to take a leap of faith. Just give in to it and accept Christ as your Savior. Disregard all this other white noise around you. You know, those inconsequential matters like archaeological history, science, lack of actual witness accounts, the fact that mankind has always been known to create urban legends, and your basic common sense. I should just ignore that and just give in to faith. That argument is much along the lines of telling a child to do something because I said so. That is the mantra of a group that does not want mankind to progress in thought or advancement in his knowledge. If we had listened to that sort of reasoning long ago, we would still believe that the sun revolves around the earth, because that must be the way it is according to your church. There have been uncountable times in history when men have taken things just on faith, many times to their own detriment. The old Vikings used to take on faith that brutality of war and human sacrifice was serving Odin. And the terrorist jihadist believes that he is serving Allah, all based on faith. The Spanish Inquisition reigned because of faith. And who creates the rules and regulations of these faiths? Who dictates exactly what your faith should be? Who eliminated certain books from the Bible, telling you which ones were legitimate and which ones weren't? Who tells you which branch of Christianity is actually the correct one? Who dictates to you who God is going to send to hell and who He's going to spare? None of this comes from God. All of it comes from man. Man telling another man to believe in something. The pack mentality that many times leads to the destruction of the human race. The fact is, God gave us a rational mind and God gave us a questioning mind. Why don't most humans use this rationale? Because most people are comfortable in a sheep mentality. Again, whether in politics, worldview, or religion. We like to believe that we exist in our own little corner of the world where everyone thinks like us. And when you're dealing with matters like the afterlife, you really want your corner of the world to think like you, because it confirms that you're correct and you'll sleep better at night, not agonizing in the small hours of the morning worrying about this whole death thing. But the few of us who broke away from Christianity, and especially those who broke away from fundamentalist Christianity, we didn't do so easily. And that's kind of my point to all the Christian fundamentalists, the regular Christians, as well as the apologists. We didn't want to leave. You should have been easily able to convince us to stay. But the reason we did leave is because we did something that nobody else in your church did. We started researching for ourselves. Bart Ehrman was at the Moody College, the training ground of the Christian fundamentalist apologist. I was brought up Christian, deconverted in the late 80s, even was beginning to be convinced to come back in the early 2000s, would have called myself a skeptical Christian 10 or 15 years ago, and then very reluctantly left the flock again. And this should be what makes the rest of you consider deconversion. Because if somebody wants to stay, he's more apt to believe those who want him to stay as well. And that's the point that many of you, especially in the Christian fundamentalist churches, need to think about. And I hope many of you watching this are in your teen or late teen years and reflect on this matter long before it becomes ingrained and you end up a permanent member of this cult. The same point that all the hosts of the Atheist Experience ask all the Christian callers when they chime in. What research have you actually done? Because if you actually start looking at the historical research for the legitimacy of Christ being divine, you're going to find it's not there. If you start challenging William Lane Craig's and Lee Strobel's claims, you'll find they aren't evidence. You'll find they're speculation, and poor speculation at that. I wonder if we didn't have the ability to fact check the way we do today with the internet and cyberspace, whether I would still be buying into the Lee Strobel mantra. Because the libraries and bookstores only had so much. They didn't have earlychristianwritings.org back then. They didn't have the Encyclopedia Britannica right at your fingertips. The local library didn't have an opinion of every Hebrew scholar sitting on its shelves on matters concerning the legitimacy of Yeshua as a divine being. You couldn't just side by side compare the actual Hebrew script to the New American Bible and see for yourself how it was altered. I would probably be a Christian today if I didn't have all that evidence to research right at my fingertips. And this is my point to the Christian fundamentalists that I continue to argue with. All of you continue to leave comments telling me I'm wrong. When you have someone who is absolutely wanting to reconvert to Christianity, who really does want to believe that Christ rose from the dead, and that person has all this ability to research it, with hundreds of times more capability than your local library and bookstores, he is an easy target. I should have easily been able to find the legitimacy of William Lane Craig's claims, Lee Strobel's claims, Josh McDowell's claims, Charles Colson, and all the rest of the apologists. But what I find, Christians and Christian fundamentalists, are nothing but untruths, so-called evidence that's really conjecture, and a lot of molding things to try to fit their worldview. So if you have someone who would be so easily convinced and ultimately would wish to return to Christianity and has access to fact check all your apologists, you have to ask yourself, how come we can't convince him? And if you'd like to check out some more facts versus speculation material, click on the playlist at the end of the video and check out my own work, which I admit is fiction, The Second Fall, an offbeat apocalypse sure to offend the fundamentalist and probably everyone else. Link is on video description as well as the banner, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.